From when date Bible it is first necessary to know the Bible it is a library its name Bible and when many books written at all kinds of times for us Christians it is divided into two major groups. First there are all the books that were written before the coming of Jesus Christ and that is called the Old Testament, i.e. the Old Covenant that God made with men, and then those that were written in the coming after the coming of Jesus, this is called the New Testament, the covenant in the blood of Jesus, who died on the cross. The Old Testament contains 46 books. There are many literary genres. There is the Pentateuch in particular that tells all the beginning of humanity. The conquest of the Promised Land begins with Josué just after the Pentateuch, and Josué is a book of historical genre, that is to say that they tell the story of the Hebrew people. We have other kinds of books. We have prophets who preached to their time announcing the misfortunes but also the happinesses, and one has books of wisdom, which collects proverbs, for example, of the wisdom of the people. The New Testament meanwhile contains 27 books. None was written by Jesus. There are the most important, the four Gospels, of which only two seem to have been written by disciples of the apostles of Jesus. To know the audience, Matthew 1, and especially there is almost certain John, the disciple that Jesus loved, that he wrote towards the end of his life, so no doubt to 80-90 after Jesus Christ. Mark and Luke did not know Jesus, him who was a doctor, said one, and Mark's a disciple of Saint Pierre. One has in a second part the Acts of the Apostles, so a story made by his Luke of what did the apostles to announce the gospel at the beginning, and it stops abruptly at some point, that is to say, probably before the persecution, Nero, and death of Stone and Paul in Rome, which is not to tell then a whole series of letters. Most come from Paul apostle, who was converted by an apparition of Jesus on the path of Damascus, but we also have letters of people of Jude Stone. We even have a letter of Jacques, and finally a book very mysterious that we kept because visibly some are written by the famous Johns that wrote his gospel, the Apocalypse of Saint John, a dream in symbolic form that tell what must happen soon, so a book of prophecies about events our life but also from the end of the world. Then candas frames the Old Testament, and well, we can say that according to all specialists it was formatted, it means organized in book form as we see it now during the Babylonian exile. To know that the Hebrew people were deported inland in 687 BC by the Babylonians, it was a terrible disaster. The prophet Jeremiah tells the second book of the Maccabas in the chalk cluster 2 managed to hide some of the temple furniture and archives in a cave that has not yet been found, which may be somewhere in the Sinai desert, and then sources were washed away by the priests of the temple, and there certainly because they had found that many integrate with the pagans who surrounded them. They wanted to format all the archives of their people. We know that he had several sources of the same story. We have a proof by example in the book of Genesis, where some passages are written to the gods is called Elohim, others to the gods is named Yahweh, so that sometimes the same narrative is neither side by side with the two, so have as it is possible to reconstitute various sources that they have compiled. One can even get a fair enough idea of the origin of their sources. Some sources obviously are very old, probably date oral traditions of, for example, a very old people, for example, a story in the book of Genesis in chapter 6 verse 2, which tells how the sons of God found that the daughters of men were beautiful and that they slept together and that mankind was born weird. Now we think for some years that it would probably be a genetic pollution with species close Neanderthals, especially we find it in the Near East and in Europe, visibly a DNA coming from these men there CAC pretty well before the invention of the writing, so maybe people have passed on things. We also have sources Dabi Water Nyan, it's from Babylon, it's from the region, in any case from Mesopotamia, that comes from Abraham, e.g. story of the deluge. It is written almost verbatim except that they are multiple gods in the archives of cuneiform texts, that is to say on clay plates written with a small corner. Babylon. Other source Babylonian book of Leviticus, the code of law that is given to the Jewish people. Windshield, it seems in fact looks quite like codes of laws of the Babylon region. Retro, we have engraved on stones. And then there are Egyptian sources of which we know that are is the Hebrew people of Egypt. We have for example the story of Joseph. The name of Joseph is given in the book of Genesis chapter 41 verse 45 Sifnath Mapanaz. We do not know what that means, and we found out recently Professor Davidovich assembles something quite believable that it was the Egyptian name of An-Vizir of Pharaoh Amenophis III, but was written to upside down, and so that by reading it on the spot we would get Amenophis, son of the Egyptian name, maybe from Joseph. We also have sources it's mythical, so the prophets, for example, those who preach like that are Jewish Jews, simply they speak with their Jewish words and their Jewish expressions. And finally after the Babylonian exile, while this first Bible to and he is in shape the Hebrew people, the Jewish people is conquered by the Greeks, and there we have books written in GR from Greek sources. It is from this period that the notion of immortal souls appears, but also of purgatory of indulgence. For example, in the second book of the Maccabees chapter 12, some Jews did not want these books written in Greek. He thought it was an addition at the time when there was a great war precisely to fight against the Greek culture other contrary, which gave the dynasty of the Asmodeans, and who gave Pharisees in the time of Jesus, said that these books was to be kept. In any case, all the Bible translated into Greek is what is called the 70. What can be said then of the Hebrew people? And although in fact it is a sponge, since always from 13 old, having kept one, having invented a writing, he kept what was best in the civilizations that crossed him during his story, and that gave this fantastic book that tells the progressive maturation of a people who has a characteristic. They believe in a particular God called in the time of Moses there was, that means the eternal I am. As to the New Testament, do what it comes, and well, it was put in place. It was written after the death of Jesus. We do not know what date exactly, but more and more authors think that it was done very quickly, and that the first to have been Christ. And the Gospel of Mark may be a version in Hebrew still, that this source there was taken over by the UDK and also by Matthew, while Jean writes something absolutely original. As for the letters of St. Paul, they are obviously written, I would say, before 60 after Jesus Christ, so in the 30 years which follows the death of Jesus, because I would say at a given moment he martyred in Rome. The tradition seems to indicate the canon of the Old Testament, that means the number of books was kept by the early Christian church, taking him to the Jews, the Jewel who had the most books, and the New Testament framework was fixed at a given moment by a council.
C'était un ajout au moment où il y avait eu une grande guerre justement pour se battre contre la culture grecque. D'autres, au contraire, qui donnèrent la dynastie des Asmonéens et qui donnèrent les pharisiens au temps de Jésus, disaient que ces livres devaient être gardés. En tout cas, toute la Bible a été traduite en grec, c'est ce qu'on appelle la Septante. Qu'est-ce qu'on peut dire alors du peuple hébreu? Eh bien, qu'en fait, c'est une éponge. Depuis toujours, depuis très ancien, ayant inventé une écriture, il a gardé ce qui était le mieux dans les civilisations qu'il a croisées au cours de son histoire. Et ça a donné ce livre fantastique qui raconte la maturation progressive d'un peuple qui a une caractéristique: il croit en un Dieu particulier. Un Dieu particulier appelé au temps de Moïse Yahvé, ça veut dire l'Éternel, je suis. Quant au Nouveau Testament, d'où est-ce qu'il vient? Eh bien, il a été mis en place, il a été écrit après la mort de Jésus. Oh, on ne sait pas quelle date exactement, mais de plus en plus d'auteurs pensent que ça s'est fait très vite et que le premier à avoir été écrit, c'est l'évangile de Marc, peut-être une version en hébreu. Toujours est-il que cette source-là a été reprise par Luc et aussi par Mathieu, tandis que Jean écrit quelque chose d'absolument original. Quant aux lettres de saint Paul, elles sont évidemment écrites, je dirais, avant 60 après Jésus-Christ, donc dans les 30 ans qui suivent la mort de Jésus, puisque je dirais, à un moment donné, il est martyrisé à Rome, la tradition semble l'indiquer. Le canon de l'Ancien Testament, ça veut dire le nombre de livres, a été gardé par l'Église chrétienne des débuts en le prenant chez les Juifs qui avaient le plus de livres, et le canon du Nouveau Testament a été fixé à un moment donné par un concile